Some things don't announce themselves. They just settle in, quietly, steadily, until one day you look up and realize the ground has shifted completely beneath you. Astrid had been telling herself this was casual. A kiss, a few good conversations, nothing that required a decision. But Nolan O'Connor had never once behaved like a man who was interested in casual. And somewhere between the gallery and the doorstep and the phone calls that ran past midnight, she had stopped being careful, without even noticing the moment it happened. The only problem? There was something he hadn't told her yet, something that had been there from the very beginning. If you're new here, subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Part 3 starts now. The week after the kiss had a different texture than the weeks before it. Not louder, quieter actually, in the way that things get quiet when something real is growing underneath the surface. They saw each other twice. Once for coffee on Wednesday morning, brief and easy, standing at a counter in a place near his office that made genuinely good espresso and had no seating, which meant the whole thing lasted 40 minutes and felt both too short and exactly right. Once on Thursday evening, when he met her after work and they walked along the esplanade without any particular destination, the Charles dark and flat beside them, the city lit up on both banks like it was showing off. He had reached for her hand before they'd gone half a block. She had let him without comment, which was its own kind of statement. The physical awareness between them had shifted since the doorstep. It was still present, more present, actually. But it had settled into something less urgent and more specific. She noticed the way he stood slightly closer than necessary when they were looking at something together. He noticed the way she angled toward him when she was engaged in a conversation, as if proximity were a natural byproduct of interest. Small things, consistent things, the kind that accumulate without announcing themselves. Saturday, he invited her to his apartment. Dinner, he said. He was cooking, which she had not expected, and she told him so when she arrived and found him in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up and something on the stove that smelled like garlic and white wine and actual effort. "You seem surprised again," he said without turning around. "I have a face, apparently," she said. "Several," he confirmed, and she could hear the smile in it even from across the room. The apartment was exactly what she'd imagined, and also nothing like it. Yes, it was large, and yes, the windows overlooked the Charles, with the kind of view that cost a specific amount of money per square foot. But it was also lived in. Books stacked on the coffee table with actual bookmarks in them. A worn leather chair angled toward the window at a slight tilt that suggested it had been moved and never corrected. A small framed photograph on the kitchen shelf that she clocked immediately, but didn't ask about yet. She sat at the kitchen island while he cooked, and they talked with the ease of people who had moved past the phase of managing impressions. She told him about a difficult conversation with her boss. The spring funding was still uncertain, and the weight of it had been sitting on her chest all week. He listened without offering solutions, which was the right instinct, and when she was done, he simply said, "That's a real thing to be carrying." And somehow, that was enough. After dinner, they moved to the couch, with wine and the specific, unhurried quality of a Saturday night with nowhere to be. She was close enough that when he turned to say something, she could feel the warmth of him along her arm. At some point, the conversation slowed into something more comfortable than silence. The kind of quiet that exists between people who no longer need to fill space. His hand found hers on the cushion between them. Not reaching, just covering. Present and still and warm. She turned her head to look at him and found him already looking at her, which no longer surprised her the way it once had. He kissed her slowly this time, one hand moving to her jaw, tilting her face up with a gentleness that contradicted the steadiness of his grip. And she felt the want in it, contained, deliberate, moving at a pace he was clearly choosing rather than defaulting to. She was choosing too. And then her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once, twice. She ignored it. The third time, the name on the screen caught her peripheral vision, and her breath stalled completely. It was a name she recognized, someone from Nolan's world. And the message preview, visible even from where she sat, contained 4 words that made the warmth in the room drop several degrees. She didn't reach for the phone, but he saw her face change. What did it say? His voice was quiet, not defensive, just direct, the way he always was when something mattered. Astrid picked up the phone. The message was from someone named Carter Webb, a name she didn't know, but the profile picture beside it told her enough. Someone in Nolan's orbit. Someone who ran in the same rooms, wore the same kind of suit, moved through the same world with the same ease. The message read, "Does she know you had Harwick pull her records before the gala?" She read it twice. The room didn't change. The wine was still on the table, the city still lit up outside the windows, his hand still warm from where it had been holding hers. But something had rearranged itself in the air between them, and they both felt it. She set the phone down carefully. "Who is Carter Webb?" she asked. Nolan's jaw tightened, barely, just a fraction, but she was close enough to see it. "Someone I went to school with. He works in my father's firm now." "Does he make a habit of texting you about women you're seeing?" "No," he said. "He makes a habit of being a problem." He reached for his own phone, glanced at the screen, and set it face down on the table with a deliberateness that told her he'd seen it too. Probably a separate message, a heads up, or an escalation of something that had already been in motion. She waited. This was the moment, she knew, where the version of herself from a year ago would have made it easy for him, would have said never mind, would have laughed it off, would have folded the discomfort away neatly to avoid the conversation. She didn't do that. "Nolan." He looked at her. "Did you pull my records from Harwick before the gala?" The question sat between them like something physical. He didn't look away from it, and he didn't look away from her, which she registered even through the tightness in her chest. "No," he said, "I didn't. But you knew who I was before that night." A pause. Not evasive, careful. "I knew your name," he said. "My father mentioned the gallery in passing a few weeks before the gala. Meridian, the spring exhibition, a curator named Astrid Adler. I didn't connect it to Harwick until I saw you in that room." She held his gaze. He wasn't performing steadiness, he simply had it, which was either the most reassuring thing about him or the most dangerous, depending on the night. "Why didn't you tell me that?" "Because I didn't think it changed anything," he said. "And because every time I tried to find the right moment, we were in the middle of something I didn't want to interrupt with a caveat." It was honest. She could feel that it was honest. But honest and complete weren't always the same thing, and the message on her phone was still glowing faintly on the table, like a question she hadn't finished asking. She stood up, not in anger, in the specific way that someone stands when they need to think and can't do it sitting still. She walked to the window and looked out at the Charles, dark and quiet below. He didn't follow immediately. He gave her the space, which she noticed. After a moment she heard him stand, and then he was beside her at the glass, not touching, just present, looking out at the same water. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to believe that what happened between us had nothing to do with a records pull, or a strategy, or anything Carter Webb thinks he understands." She looked at his reflection in the window. He was already looking at hers. The city held its breath outside, and Astrid, standing at the edge of something again, just like the woman in the painting, felt both options still open. But one of them was pulling harder than it had any right to. They stood at the window for a long time, long enough that the silence stopped feeling like tension and started feeling like something they were both choosing. A pause, not an ending. Astrid was doing the things she did when her instincts and her history were pulling in opposite directions. Her history said this was the part where you find the exit, where you take the small, uncomfortable thing and let it grow into a reason, because reasons were safer than trust, and trust had a poor track record in her recent experience. Her instincts said something different. Her instincts had been saying something different since a ballroom in November and a painting nobody else stopped for. "I had a relationship that ended badly," she said finally, not looking at him, looking at the river. Not dramatically, just slowly. The kind where you wake up one day and realize you've been disappearing piece by piece, and the other person either didn't notice or didn't mind. She felt him turn to look at her. She kept her eyes on the water. "I spent a long time after that being very careful," she said, "about what I let in, about who I believed." "That makes sense," he said quietly. "I'm not finished," she said. He waited. "I'm telling you that because I need you to understand that when something feels off, I don't have a lot of room for it anymore. I don't do the thing where I convince myself it's fine when it isn't." "Okay," he said. Just that. No defense, no pivot, no reassurance that arrived too quickly to be real. She turned to look at him then. He was watching her with the full, unhurried attention that she had stopped being surprised by and started being undone by. And there was something in his expression that was neither guilt nor performance, just the particular openness of someone who had decided to be seen and was holding still for it. "My father mentioned Meridian," he said again. "That part is true. When I saw you at the gala, I wasn't certain it was you until you laughed at that painting. And then I was certain, and I made a choice to cross the room, and I would make the same choice again." "Why?" she asked, not rhetorically. She wanted the actual answer. He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, just finding the honest version of it. "Because you were the one person in that room who was exactly who she was," he said. "No performance, no agenda, just you. And I had spent enough time in enough rooms full of people performing things to know that was rare." Astrid felt the crack in the wall from the sidewalk outside Meridian open slightly wider. She didn't try to close it. She crossed the distance between them instead, 2 steps, deliberate, her eyes on his, and when she reached him, she placed her hand flat against his chest, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric, the steady rhythm beneath her palm. He went very still, not frozen, just present, letting her lead. She kissed him this time, slower than the doorstep, deeper than the couch, with the specific intention of someone who had made a decision and was no longer second-guessing it. His arms came around her gradually, one hand at her waist, one moving up her back, drawing her in without rushing the geometry of it. She felt the want in him, carefully held, and the care itself was what finally loosened the last of the tension she'd been carrying all evening. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his collarbone. His hand moved slowly up her spine, tracing the length of it like something being memorized. "Stay," he said, low and quiet and nothing like a demand. She tilted her head up to look at him, and this time, she didn't calculate the risk. She just answered. She stayed. Morning arrived the way it does after nights that matter, quietly, without fanfare, the light coming through the tall windows at a low angle that turned everything in the room gold and soft and slightly unreal. Astrid woke before he did. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself to the unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of his arm across her waist, the particular silence of an apartment high enough above the city that the street noise arrived only as a distant suggestion. She felt the specific vulnerability of a first morning, the way the night before exists with such clarity, while the daylight asks you to be a person again, with history and caution, and all the reasonable things you set aside when someone's hands are warm and certain and moving like they know exactly where they're going. She didn't regret it. That was the thing she checked first, quietly, like reading a temperature. No regret. Just the slightly exposed feeling of having let someone all the way in after a very long time of not doing that. Nolan woke slowly, the way people do when they aren't anxious about what they'll find. His arm tightened briefly around her before he was fully conscious. A reflex, not a performance, and she felt it land somewhere underneath her sternum with a warmth that was becoming inconveniently familiar. "You're awake," he said. His voice was different in the morning, lower, unguarded, the careful precision of his usual speech worn away by sleep. "Have been for a while," she admitted. He shifted to look at her, propping himself up slightly. His hair was a mild disaster, and he didn't seem remotely concerned about it, which she found unreasonably endearing. "Regretting the commute?" he asked. He meant the distance from her apartment. She'd mentioned once that she lived 20 minutes south by train. "Not yet," she said. He smiled at that, slow and real, and without any of the restraint he usually applied to expressions that gave too much away. She stored it somewhere private. They had coffee at his kitchen counter in the thin December light, her in one of his shirts, which was several sizes too large, and somehow the most comfortable thing she'd owned in years. Him in yesterday's clothes, with the sleeves still rolled up. It was ordinary in the best possible way, the kind of ordinary that only exists between people who have moved past the performance of early attraction into something quieter and more durable. He made eggs. She made the second pot of coffee because his ratio was wrong, and she told him so, and he looked genuinely affronted for approximately 4 seconds before conceding the point, which made her laugh in a way that felt like something releasing. But underneath the ease of it, something was still unresolved. Carter Webb's message sat at the back of her mind like a splinter, not painful enough to demand attention, but present enough to remind her it was there. She hadn't asked everything she needed to ask. She knew that. She was choosing, consciously, to let the morning be what it was before she pulled that thread. What she didn't know was that Nolan was thinking about it too. He watched her from across the counter, laughing at something, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug, entirely herself in a way that made his chest do something inconvenient. And he was quietly, privately reckoning with the fact that there was still one thing he hadn't told her. Not because it was damning, but because it was the kind of thing that changed the shape of the story, and he hadn't yet found the version of it that was both honest and fair. He was running out of time to find it, because Carter Webb, whatever his intentions, had already opened the door, and someone else was about to walk through it. The someone else arrived on a Tuesday. Astrid was at Meridian, midway through a conversation with a local photographer whose work she'd been considering for a future show, when a woman walked through the front door with the specific energy of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had decided in advance how the conversation would end. She was polished, in the particular way that suggested it was effortless, which meant it wasn't. Late 30s, dark coat, the kind of quiet confidence that came from occupying rooms like this one since birth. She waited until the photographer left. Then she approached the desk with a smile that was professionally warm and personally careful. "You're Astrid Adler," she said, not a question. "I am," Astrid said. "I'm Diana Webb," the woman said. Carter's sister. The name landed with precision. Astrid kept her expression neutral through the specific effort of someone who had worked in galleries long enough to know how to receive information without reacting to it in real time. "What can I do for you?" she asked. Diana Webb placed a small envelope on the desk between them. Not dramatically, just set it down, the way you set down something you've been carrying for a while and are ready to put somewhere. "I want to be clear about something before you open that," she said. "I'm not here because Carter sent me. I'm here in spite of him." Astrid looked at the envelope, then at Diana. "Carter has a version of events that he's been circulating," Diana continued, "about Nolan and about you. I've known Nolan O'Connor since we were 12 years old, and I know the difference between what Carter says about people and what's actually true." "What does Carter say?" Astrid asked. "That Nolan had the Foundation's events coordinator pull the guest list for Meridian's donor network 6 weeks before the gala," Diana said. "That he flagged your name specifically. That none of this was accidental." The gallery was very quiet. Outside, a delivery truck moved slowly down Tremont, the low rumble of it passing through the walls and then fading. Astrid was aware of her own breathing, aware of the envelope on the desk, aware of the specific cold that had settled in her chest. Not quite the same cold as Carter's message, because this version came with context, and context was somehow worse. "And what's actually true?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Diana was quiet for a moment. "What's true is that Nolan did see your name on a donor adjacency list," she said carefully. "He didn't pull it. It came across his desk as part of a routine Foundation report. And yes, he recognized it. And yes, he looked you up." She paused. "He knew who you were before that night. He knew you worked at Meridian. He knew about the spring show. He didn't engineer the gala invitation. But he wasn't walking in blind either." Astrid didn't move. The envelope sat between them like a sentence waiting to be finished. "What's in it?" she asked. "A copy of the Foundation report," Diana said. "So you have the actual thing instead of Carter's version of it." She picked up the envelope, held it without opening it. Across the desk, Diana Webb looked at her with the expression of someone who had done what they came to do and was leaving the rest to the room. "For what it's worth," Diana said quietly, pulling on her gloves, "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I've known him long enough that that means something." She left. The gallery door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Astrid stood at the desk for a long moment, the envelope in her hands, the winter light coming through the front windows at its flat and honest angle. And this time, it felt less like illumination and more like exposure. She didn't open the envelope that day. She set it on her desk, finished her shift, locked the gallery, and walked home through the December cold with her hands in her pockets and her mind doing the thing it did when it had too much material to process, going very quiet, very still, like a room before a storm. She read the Foundation report that night, alone at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold beside her. It was exactly what Diana had described. A routine donor adjacency document. Her name, Meridian's name, the spring exhibition. 3 lines in a spreadsheet among dozens of others. No annotation, no flag. Just her name, visible, on a page that had crossed his desk 6 weeks before the gala. She sat with it for a long time. The version of herself from a year ago would have made it simple, would have taken the ambiguity and collapsed it into certainty, because certainty, even painful certainty, was easier than the space where trust was required. But she was not that version of herself anymore, or she was trying not to be. She called him the next morning. "I need to see you," she said. "Tell me where," he said. They met at the esplanade, cold and gray and almost empty, the Charles flat and dark beside them, the city on both banks muffled by a low December sky. He was there before her, hands in his coat pockets, and when he saw her walking toward him, something moved through his expression that was neither relief nor guilt, but the particular combination of both that belongs to someone who has been honest and is not certain it was enough. She stopped in front of him and looked at him for a moment without speaking. "You knew my name before that night," she said. "Yes," he said. No preamble, no softening, just the plain word, placed between them with both hands. "You didn't tell me." "No," he said. "I should have. I kept waiting for the moment to feel right, and then we were already somewhere I didn't want to complicate with a caveat that I genuinely believed didn't change anything." "It changes how the story starts," she said. "I know," he said. "It doesn't change why I crossed the room." She looked at him. The cold moved between them and around them, and neither of them moved against it. "I spent 2 years with someone who edited himself for me," she said, "who showed me the version he thought I wanted, and kept the rest somewhere I couldn't see. I can't do that again." "I'm not editing," he said. "I'm standing here telling you that I saw your name on a list and recognized it, and felt something I didn't have language for yet, and that when I saw you in that room, it became language very quickly. That's the whole story. There's no other version." She believed him, not because it was easy, but because she had been paying attention for weeks now, to the way he listened, to the way he showed up, to the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, and none of it had ever been a performance. She stepped forward and took his face in both hands, her cold fingers against his jaw, and kissed him there, on the empty esplanade, with the river beside them, and the city indifferent above. He kissed her back with the specific warmth of someone who had been holding something carefully for a long time, and was finally allowed to set it down. When they pulled apart, she stayed close, her hands still at his jaw. "Don't keep things from me," she said quietly. "Not anymore." "No," he said. "Not anymore." He covered her hands with his, holding them there against his face for a moment, and looked at her with everything he'd been containing since a ballroom in November. Undisguised, unhurried, entirely present. Boston moved around them. The river kept going. And Astrid Adler, who had walked into one night expecting nothing, stood in the December cold and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, exactly like herself. If this story found its way into your chest, drop a number in the comments, 1 to 10. No explanation needed. Just let me know it landed. Thank you for being here, for listening, for staying all the way to the end. These stories only exist because you do.